I welcome you to the 2021 Franciscan Zoom Lectures hosted by the Franciscan School of Theology. Our presenter tonight, Dr. Donna Foley, has her Master of Theological Studies from the Franciscan School of Theology and her Doctor of Ministry from Fordham University. With a background in the performing arts, her ministerial life has included serving as Director of Theatrical Productions with at-risk youth and with the unhoused in the San Francisco Bay Area. Having served as Director of Spiritual Formation and Student Services at FST, she currently works in pastoral care with the Sisters of St. Joseph of Philadelphia, and recently completed a study of the congregation's spirituality as related to its care for elders. Donna is a secular Franciscan with an abiding interest in the many ways Franciscan tradition can be interpreted and practiced. I welcome Donna.
And I welcome you to this little study, little reflection on vocation, on place, and on a Franciscan sense of both of these things. Do you know where you are right now? Do you really know? How well can we know our place? In our little time together, I'd like to consider how our locality matters and how matters of place can shape a spirituality of vocational development. Scripture, examples from human studies, and the field of spirituality will be used to describe the significance of physical location and dislocation in ministry. Now, this is done with an eye towards the lives of people who wish to serve in diverse capacities within and outside church settings. For example, people who attend or support a theology school. And in this discussion, we're going to assume three tensive powers in human life and in ministry: the power of place or home, the power of placelessness or homelessness, and the power of movement. And I have just a few place images that I'll share throughout our time together, places with many layers of people and many layers of experience. And you might call to mind not only places you've traveled to, but more especially places you've been for extended periods of time, places that have formed you in some way. And we're going to notice how attention to place and placelessness and movement can foster the capacity for self-understanding, can enhance ministry, and can cultivate emotional and spiritual maturity. And we're going to ask how those who minister might account for the impact of movement and displacement in their lives. How people who minister might account for the influence of natural and human-made spaces on themselves, as well as on those they serve. And here's a place with layers of meaning: the fountain outside the Philadelphia Museum of Art that I think was probably intentionally meant as an aesthetic, but became a place of refreshment in the hot summer nights of the city and the days that needed refreshment. So places can have layers of intended and unintended meaning, depending on what people do and make of them, of course. And we're going to really spend some time thinking about the Franciscan tradition and its influence in ministry and what it might do to influence ministry. And we're going to think about how this Christian tradition that's long sensitive to the material world and to questions of connection and movement might be employed to explore ideas of ecological home and homelessness in vocational development. And to illustrate that, here's two Franciscans, St. Elizabeth of Hungary from the 13th century, who moved not out of choice a number of times in her life and went to serve those around her. And brother, now Father Sam Masada of the Franciscan Friars and his ministry. Franciscans moving and giving in so many different places and being shaped by those places. We're going to pay attention to those things. When we consider the power of place, we might start with scripture, and we might start with a psalm about place. Psalm 137, where we listen to the song tell us, by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat weeping when we remembered Zion. On the poplars in its midst, we hung up our harps. For there our captors asked us for the words of a song, our tormentors for joy. Sing for us a song of Zion. But how could we sing a song of the Lord in a foreign land? As current or future employees of religious and nonprofit institutions, stability and security are unlikely to be the defining features of Christian ministers' professional lives. As denizens of a globalized culture and economy, they will communicate with people they cannot touch, eat food from they know not where, and relocate themselves, perhaps often. They may very well be called to serve, or they may be people who are migrants and refugees. The very effects of climate disruption are placing new groups of refugees on the horizon of ministry. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees notes this. Many, many activist groups around the world note this. And of course, in addition to climate displacement, the waves of continuing violence in many parts of the world create situations where people need or attempt to move. Ministers, or people who hope to be ministers, will almost certainly spend considerable time in what anthropologist Marc Auger calls empirical non-places. That is, spaces of circulation, consumption, and communication. Highways, airports, transit systems, and cyberspace. Now, in the last year plus, it's only that last non-place where we've spent a lot of time, some of us. But ministers will spend time in all of them. The degree of self-understanding in ministers and the effectiveness of their ministry, the maturity of their emotional and spiritual lives, must all be understood in terms of ecological place. And yet some of the places where they spend time are very difficult to describe as places. When we speak of ecology, as we would any other element of cultural context, and that's what I'm proposing here, we're in agreement with scholars such as geographer Nicholas Entrikin, who holds that recognition of the full dimensionality of experience and the cognitive understanding of place is necessary to appreciate its significance in modern life. And that's Nicholas Entrikin in his work, The Betweenness of Place. Do you ever feel like you're a little bit in between places, even when you're sitting somewhere? Or in the language of Eugene Victor Walter, in his Placeways, a theory of human environment, we might hear, we call locations of experience places. So to say that one's spiritual relationship to the environment, both natural and built, is significant, is to say, along with Walter, that meaningless objects do not exist. It is to suggest that the minister in formation is accompanied not just by family of origin or current human community and cultural patterns, but by sidewalks, walls, rivers, trees, animals, and stuff, things. These are two machines that sit in the room where I usually work. I like one of them a little better than the other, but I use one more than I use the other. What are the things around you right now? And are they saying anything to you? A history of actual movement from place to place, attentive to things and creatures around us, might actually be a defining feature of many people who study and work in ministry. Attention to the tangible characteristics, the ecology of place, could prove fruitful, as no one develops a vocation apart from environment, however multiplied or sequenced that vocation may be. Moreover, it would be difficult to take particular places seriously without also taking seriously all of the creatures that reside there. If movement from one linguistic world to another impacts professional development, and I think many students at FST could say it does, is it possible that hearing different bird song, or none at all, outside your office, could that also change you? In posing such a question, I'm suggesting that a function of creation is beyond that of a book to be read and an aspect of self-care. Though both of these commonly assigned roles to creation are significant, they limit creation to a relatively passive role. I'm positing here something more mutual, more active, a relationship that's a little bit more like family dynamics. Now, with the preceding in mind, the work of Douglas Christie may be especially relevant to our ministerial circumstances, especially his discussion of topos, of place, as it relates to a practice of contemplative ecology. With Christie, we can arrive at an understanding of place as almost actively spiritually formative. And this leads us to suspect that treating ecology, place, as a category for vocational maturation may prove fruitful. And drawing on the work of Keith Basso among the Western Apache and on the insights of American photographer Robert Adams, Douglas Christie describes the contemplative practice of seeing more in a place or a thing, noting the revelatory power of things that are not us. He says, it's a way of seeing the world, a way of being in the world that allows us to cherish it with all the feeling we are capable of. It's a way of seeing that enables us to gauge the true significance of what we gaze upon. This kind of seeing is akin to what the early Christians meant when they spoke of theoria, that way of seeing into the heart of reality that sometimes reveals the very face of the divine. It's also a way of seeing the world that might inform the development of pastoral skills and professional ethics in people preparing for ministry. In referring to human encounters with places or non-human beings as seeing into the heart of reality, I would suggest that it is this way of seeing the world which reveals the cramped quarters of an ICU to be an intimate chapel for prayer. It's a Eucharistic way of seeing the world. The patient in the hospital bed, alone and in pain, is seen for the sacred being he is. And not even the hospital equipment is excluded from this way of seeing and being. And their own true significance would be revealed under an attentive enough gaze. And so I wonder if, rather than saying this contemplative gaze sometimes reveals the divine, we might say it always reveals the divine to those who have eyes to see. To refer to another of our senses, is it possible to live in our physical surroundings as if they were always talking to us, telling us something about the eternal? Do we have ears to hear? And here I'm thinking of the wonderful work of Carolyn Walker Bynum, her Christian Materiality, a study of religion in the Middle Ages. Bynum says that while modern theorists must work to discover how things talk, medieval theorists had to work to discover how to get them to shut up. Things say things to us. Now, expecting a person to attend to place or home or surroundings with so much seriousness is to take the demands of contextual theology perhaps to its very limits. And maybe it takes it too far. I began with an assertion that experiences in and with the rest of creation must be considered somewhat like familial realities in vocational development. And in order to see what this might mean, we must do what people in ministry are often asked to do. We must think about love. And to reflect a little bit more on the significance of place in vocational development, it will be helpful to turn to Douglas Christie's treatment of desire, sympathy, and love, eros, in our relationship with the natural world. Citing its use in Christian tradition and in contemporary ecological discourse, Christie writes that eros refers to a longing to share in the life of another, whether that other be understood as a person, a place, a non-human species, or God. Now, this term, eros' increasing prominence in contemporary thought and practice points to a growing recognition of the centrality of desire for helping us understand who we are in the world. One element of vocational development is to understand who we are in the world. So a practice of contemplating that very world may be helpful. Perhaps the overworked person in ministry really should step outside for a bit and contemplate a tree. Now, in this discussion of place and desire in other beings, Douglas Christie acknowledges the hypothesis and the study of biophilia. And it's Edward O. Wilson who's offered this increasingly well-known hypothesis on the connection between self-knowledge and ecological appreciation. Wilson defines biophilia as that innate tendency to focus on life and life-like processes, noting that the degree we come to understand other organisms, we will place greater value on them and on ourselves. With biophilia-inspired disciplines, we who wish to grow in ministry can find so many rich resources. And within that field, environmental psychology presents itself as a way forward to people in ministry because it suggests, like a tradition we're pretty familiar with, that humans are part of nature, and it takes an approach that focuses on our subconscious human responses to places. I hope you're hearing an affinity between a lot of contemporary research outside the Franciscan tradition and our tradition itself. And I would venture to say that many of you already work very creatively with some awareness of these concepts, that you offer spaces that are warm and welcoming, that you plan events, now that that's becoming possible again, that flow smoothly and comfortably. I think an appreciative inquiry into our own practices would no doubt reveal many instances of life-focused design. Would a sensitivity to the power of place assist leaders in ministry who must communicate necessary institutional changes to others? Are there any implications here for our expectations of distance learning? As the formational context for ministers becomes not the school campus, but the minister's local environment. I think that last question takes on added weight. But in each of these disciplines that have been mentioned so far, we're not yet complete. They cannot provide all the substance needed for necessary theological reflection in formation for ministry. For a fuller understanding of what it means to take our physical location, our home, seriously, we turn to scripture, we turn to developments within Christian tradition, and recently and across many denominations and much theological and pastoral work, we learn to bring to light the language of Christian teaching on ecology. And of course, one of these is very familiar to us, I think. Laudato Si sounds a cautionary note about the usefulness of the natural world, even as it regards our own development. While it is good for us to gain self-understanding through a relationship to the environment and to places, that is not, Pope Francis insists, why other things exist. Among many related matters, the Pope writes, the ultimate purpose of other creatures is not to be found in us. Rather, all creatures are moving forward with us toward a common point of arrival, which is God, in that transcendent fullness where the risen Christ embraces and illumines all things. Now, in this view, everything else has a vocation and a destiny. Neither my self-understanding nor my desire for meaning serve as a reason for the existence of a mountain, a neutron star, or a bacterium. They are all here at someone else's pleasure. And yet, we are encouraged to pay attention to particular places. Pope Francis tells us, the history of our friendship with God is always linked to particular places, which takes on an intensely personal meaning. We all remember places, and revisiting those memories does us much good. Anyone who's grown up in the hills, or used to sit by the spring to drink, or played outdoors in the neighborhood square, going back to these places is a chance to recover something of their true selves. Now, that recovery of something of their true selves is no small matter in the training and formation of Christian ministers. As matters of professional integrity, the person in professional ministry is assumed to have a fairly high level of self-knowledge, as well as emotional and spiritual maturity. Knowing where you really are matters in ministry. And yet, some spiritual traditions, including at times Christianity, are suspicious of relationships that depend too much on materiality. Should we not voice some caution when we speak about the formative power of place? Can too great an attachment to a particular home be harmful to human ecology? This reflection on the power of place began with the opening verses of Psalm 137, and the remembrance of and the longing for Zion. It's a text sometimes evoked in discussions of place and home. As we consider whether strong attachment to particular environments might be problematic for personal development, let us recall that the last line of that song goes like this: "Blessed the one who seizes your children and smashes them against the rock." Maybe things and places can have too much meaning. Maybe we see too much in them. Maybe they speak too loudly, or more likely, we misinterpret what they are saying. Paradoxically, people in ministry who would be emotionally and spiritually mature need also to consider the reality of placelessness in a Christian understanding of ecology. And that brings us to that second tensive power. Foxes have dens, and birds of the sky have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to rest his head. This poignant self-disclosure from an itinerant Messiah should give any Christian pause when discussing vocational context. It is another scripture passage that shows up in writings about the place of place in human lives. It gives witness to much of the incarnation's meaning and also to the reality faced by all too many of God's children today. If, as expressed in Psalm 137, too strong a care for home can lead to vilification and violence, are there other ways we might approach spiritualities of place? When so many humans and countless other species must flee or vanish from their familiar environs, what right have others to wax nostalgic over a particular creek, street corner, or office space? One scholar who sensitively interrogates the meaning of home and religion is the humanist geographer, Yi-Fu Tuan. In his evocative work, Religion, From Place to Placelessness, Tuan argues for a universal rather than particular sense of home as signifying a more highly developed spirituality. Tuan maintains that for true followers of Buddha, Jesus Christ, or the great prophets of Israel, the shift from place to placelessness is not cause for regret. For to them, the true home for human beings is never a geographical place, a holy city, or a mountain, somewhere on earth. It is always elsewhere. What makes Tuan's assertion so compelling are first the author's clear appreciation of actual holy places across multiple traditions, and second, his reflection on supporting texts from within those traditions. When Tuan asks rhetorically, "What is the ultimate test of a religion?" he responds, "My answer is the truly good person, a saint, if you will, is someone embedded in this world, yet not of this world." Now, here's an interesting contrast of views on human ecology. The Roman pontiff offers that humans recover something of their true selves in earthly places, while the humanist geographer insists that out of this world spirituality is the mark of religious progress across traditions. With this complicated non-conclusion regarding whether home or homelessness signify vocational maturity, we can still maintain that place and ecology matter, but we are left wondering how they matter. The tension between these two spiritual perspectives on home, the universal and the particular, runs throughout Christian scripture and traditions, of course. Followers of the incarnate Christ make an implicit agreement to learn to live with that tension. He himself was born in a place, laid in a manger, and yet he had no place to lay his head. How does one dwell, much less serve authentically on this planet, while self and others are always in motion? I would suggest that we in ministry must apprehend with new urgency the ancient Christian exhortation to live truly in the world, though not entirely of it. And now, a Franciscan sense of place. And in this consideration, I am deeply indebted to the work of Brother Bill Short and Brother Keith Warner. I would encourage you, if you want to explore a little further these themes in Franciscan spirituality, to turn to their work. To open a way for people in ministry to integrate, possibly resolve the tensions around home and homelessness, the strategies of the Franciscan tradition, along with current research, might be used in such a way that new ministers can learn to speak in new ways of the natural world, of place and of placelessness. We can recall the words of St. Francis in the later rule, "Let the brothers not make anything of their own, neither house nor place, nor anything at all, as pilgrims and strangers in this world, serving the Lord in poverty and humility. Let them go, seeking alms with confidence." This text, enshrined and codified in the early years of the Franciscan family's life, provides us with a glimpse of the pilgrim identity that may sustain ministers on the move. It is good to remember that this rule was written in times of intense social and institutional change. In that passage I just read, the brothers are being exhorted to a spirit of non-appropriation and to one of trust. Francis tells them, as pilgrims and strangers in this world, to serve the Lord in poverty and humility, and advises them to go seeking alms with confidence. The life of service suggested here is at once earth-connected and utterly mobile. It allows for confident movement, yet preserves the practitioner from what I would call an unhealthy detachment from the world and its inhabitants. Moving forward with this long-lived spirituality before us to nurture professional growth, it's possible to imagine a Franciscan approach to the question of location in vocation, one that unabashedly loves creation, yet is quite at home with being pilgrim and stranger. And to illustrate the experience of being both at home and homeless in the world, I offer just two very familiar stories from Franciscan hagiography. First, a meeting with a rabbit. Once, while he was staying near the town of Brescia, a certain brother brought Francis a live rabbit caught in a trap. Seeing it, the most blessed man was moved with tenderness. "Brother Rabbit," he said, "come to me. Why did you let yourself get caught?" As soon as the brother holding it let go, the rabbit, without any prompting, took shelter with the holy man, as in a most secure place, resting in his bosom. After it had rested there for a little while, the Holy Father, caressing it with motherly affection, let it go, so that now free, it would return to the woods. It kept jumping back to him, you know that. Now, aside from its charm, what might this vignette bring to a sense of vocation? The account of the rabbit offers more than what it first appears. In the received story, we might notice this interesting appreciation that other humans have of St. Francis's interactions with animals. We can surmise that something edifying, or at least intriguing, was happening for the viewers of these encounters. The rabbit and lots of other creatures brought to Francis had been caught as a source of food. Yet the rabbit, for some reason, is handed to Francis with the almost certain knowledge that he will eventually let the meal go free. Why? To see something remarkable on an otherwise dull day, perhaps. I've sometimes wondered, would anyone find my interactions so delightful, so surprising, and so memorable as this? Francis's gestures appear imprudent, if not downright wasteful of resources. Yet if we read this little story generously, we might draw out something else. When the rabbit is brought to Francis, it prompts a lesson from him. It seems the actual touching of others evokes wisdom to be shared. St. Francis asks the rabbit, "Why did you let yourself get caught?" A question he often asked his human brothers regarding other matters. Those who heard these lessons heard them from a person who seemed to be utterly at home wherever he was. Francis's itinerary, like that of Jesus, is dotted with actual places and embodied interactions. There is a groundedness in his journey, an emotional and spiritual maturity here that a modern, mobile professional passing through sequential vocations, holding multiple vocations, might want to make his own. Going forward, and in what other direction can we truly go? We hope to remain open to the call of God and the needs of God's people. We keep working with the stories we've received. In addition to love of creation, our Franciscan stories also contain the language of pilgrims and strangers. These stories can sustain us in times of change, and our fresh interpretations can give us fresh energy. The second and last reading offered here from the writings of St. Francis zooms in on the source of that pilgrim identity, the person of Jesus. In an earlier version of his rule of life, the saint had already explained why the brothers should never be ashamed to make their needs known to each other and to receive help from others. Rather good counsel, even for today's ministers. Francis asserts, as he does time and again, that they are to accept this pilgrim condition because Christ himself did. In the earlier rule, we hear, they must rejoice when they live among people considered of little value and looked down upon, among the poor and the powerless, the sick and the lepers, and the beggars by the wayside. When it is necessary, they may go for alms. Let them not be ashamed. And remember, moreover, that our Lord Jesus Christ was poor and a stranger. With this, the human person is invited to pass through many places, not as someone with her eyes fixed on heaven necessarily, but with her eyes fixed on earth, perhaps. As she seeks to follow the footprints of God incarnate, she is reminded that Christ himself was connected to and dependent on others at some time. Jesus had no place in his own creation to lay his head, and yet his wayfaring was not solitary. And here's an image of a Franciscan place, and it evokes for me place, placelessness, and movement. And I won't read it now, but I do encourage you for a snapshot of Francis's attachment to a place and his willingness to let go. Do see the story, True and Perfect Joy, one of the undated writings of St. Francis of Assisi, where he asks for the love of God to be allowed in to the Portiuncula, and he is denied entrance. It's a beautiful story on many levels. A sense of place matters in vocational development, and the interactions of Christian ministers with their environment shape them as much as language, sexuality, socioeconomic status, all of those things together. It shapes them like those things as well. And the disciplines of anthropology and evolutionary science and geography and environmental psychology can offer tools for our study of human interactions with the environment, read alongside our Franciscan sources. They can be rich, rich encouragement and strength for us. The Franciscan tradition, while affectively engaged with creation, points to the significance of pilgrim and stranger as a type of solution for interacting with the world. Returning to our earlier attention to place, placelessness, and movement, it really might foster the capacity for self-understanding. It really might enhance ministry, and it really might cultivate emotional and spiritual maturity. And in conclusion, I'd like to leave you with just a few questions. Did you ever live with any animals in your home when you were growing up? If so, can you describe their effect on your spiritual development? What birds live on the same street as you? Have you ever been able to return to a childhood home? And if so, what did it feel like? What used to live on the land where you received your undergraduate degree? What is your favorite building in your neighborhood? Why? And what is the body of water closest to you now? And what do you know about its health? And lastly, have you ever been forced to leave a place you love? Do you know anyone who has? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Foley. That was really cool. I really like those last questions, and the entire lecture. It is much appreciated. This is the Franciscan School of Theology, and we thank all of you for attending with us today. This opportunity is brought to you by our development department here, but let's please give Dr. Foley a collective applause.